A girl gave her last money to a beggar, unaware he was a millionaire. What he did next changed everything. The city never truly slept. Even after midnight, New York hummed like a restless heart, cars sighing through puddles, distant sirens fading into the dark, and the pale glow of street lamps shimmering against glass towers that reached into the clouds. Kithrine Evans pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders as the wind bit through the fabric. It was supposed to be spring, yet the night air felt cruel, indifferent. She had stayed late again at the small marketing firm where she worked, unpaid overtime, as usual, and now she was walking home, because her subway card had expired, and her wallet held only a single $10 bill. That was all she had. Left 2 months earlier, she had believed life was finally settling down. She'd moved to the city chasing a dream, a steady job, a warm apartment, a chance to build something for herself after years of caring for her sick mother back in Ohio. But dreams in this city had a price tag. Her rent kept climbing, her hours kept shrinking, and every week she found herself standing at the grocery checkout, trying to decide between bread and bus fare. Her friends from college rarely called anymore. They were too busy climbing ladders she never even reached. And tonight, when she checked her phone, the last message she'd received was from her landlord, a polite but firm reminder. Rent due tomorrow. No exceptions, she sighed, rubbing her eyes. Maybe she could skip dinner again. Maybe she could stretch the last few cans of soup until payday. She had become an expert in small sacrifices, giving up new clothes, skipping coffee, pretending she wasn't hungry during office lunches so others wouldn't notice. Her steps echoed through the nearly empty street as she passed shuttered shops and dim windows. Then she saw him. An old man sat against the brick wall near a closed bookstore. His clothes were layered and torn, his beard unkempt, and beside him lay a brown leather bag that looked older than he was. But what stopped her wasn't his appearance. It was the sign propped beside him, written in careful, shaking letters. Not hungry for food. Hungry for hope, Kithrine slowed down. She'd passed dozens of people like him before, the invisible ones everyone hurried past, pretending not to see. She always felt sorry but never stopped. There was always an excuse. I'm late. I don't have change. Someone else will help. Tonight was different. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the way his eyes, gray and weary, looked at the world. Not begging, just waiting. For what, she didn't know, but something inside her stirred. She reached into her bag, feeling the crisp $10 bill between her fingers. Her last $10. Enough for breakfast tomorrow, or the subway card she needed to get to work. Her mind protested. She couldn't afford to give it away, and yet her heart whispered, he needs it more than you. She crouched beside him. Sir, she said softly, are you okay? Do you need food or water? The old man looked up slowly. His voice was rough but calm. I need nothing, he said, except a reason to believe people still care. Kithrine's throat tightened. She hesitated for a moment, then extended the bill toward him. It's not much, she murmured. But maybe this helps a little. He blinked, staring at the money, then at her face. You're giving me your last, aren't you? He asked quietly. Her eyes widened. How would you know that? He smiled faintly. Because no one else stops when they still have more to lose. The wind blew a strand of her hair across her face. For a long moment they just looked at each other. A young woman with nothing left to give, and an old man who seemed to have already lost everything. Then he took the bill, folded it carefully, and said almost in a whisper, You gave when you had nothing. Remember that, young lady? She nodded, feeling an odd warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of sadness and relief. Take care of yourself, okay? She said, standing. He watched her walk away, her silhouette fading beneath the flickering streetlight. She never saw the way he smiled after she turned the corner, a small, knowing smile, like a secret he had been keeping for a long time. The next morning, Kithrine woke to the gray light seeping through the curtains of her small apartment. The alarm buzzed beside her bed, and for a moment she considered ignoring it. Her stomach grumbled. She hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon. She checked her wallet again, empty. The $10 bill was gone, and all she had were a few coins rattling at the bottom of her purse. Still, she didn't regret it. At work, things weren't any better. Her boss barked orders from his glass office, clients complained, and she spent most of the day fixing mistakes that weren't hers. During lunch, she sat alone at her desk, pretending to scroll her phone while everyone else chatted in the cafeteria. She thought of the old man's words. You gave when you had nothing. For some reason, those words kept echoing in her head. Maybe because no one had ever said something so kind to her before. That evening, she returned to the same street. The bookstore was still closed, the wind still cold, but the old man was gone. In his place was only the brown leather bag resting against the wall. Her heart jumped. She looked around, expecting to see him somewhere nearby, but the street was empty. Carefully, she knelt down and opened the bag. Inside, she found only one thing, a folded note. Sometimes you meet angels in disguise. Keep believing. There was no name, no address. Just those words. She frowned, puzzled. Maybe he had left it for someone else? Or maybe it was his way of saying thank you. Either way, she smiled faintly and tucked the note into her jacket pocket. That night, she placed it beside her bed, right next to the flickering lamp that barely worked. She couldn't explain it, but she felt lighter, as if the act of giving had cleared something heavy inside her. Across the city, in a quiet penthouse far above the noise and chaos, J.P. Dumney removed his disguise, the tattered coat, the beanie, the dust from his beard. In the mirror stared a man in his late 60s, clean-featured, tired-eyed, but unmistakably dignified. Once upon a time, he had been one of the richest men in the country, founder of Dumney Technologies, a billion-dollar company that created software now running in nearly every government office in the U.S. But that was years ago, before the accident that took his wife and son. After that night, JP had vanished from the world, walking away from boardrooms, interviews, and wealth that suddenly meant nothing. He spent years traveling anonymously, seeking peace he could never find. And lately, he had begun a strange experiment, disguising himself as a homeless man, wandering the streets, observing how people treated those they thought invisible. Most ignored him. Some mocked. A few offered coins without eye contact. But only one had knelt, spoken gently, and given her last dollar. JP sat by the window, looking out at the skyline glittering like scattered jewels. He held the $10 bill in his hand. On the back, in small handwriting, he had scribbled the words she deserved to hear. You gave when you had nothing. He whispered to himself, maybe she's the one I've been searching for. The following week was brutal for Kithryn. Her rent was due, her boss cut her hours again, and she started walking to work to save what little she could. But even on her hardest days, she kept thinking about that man, J.P. Dumney, though she didn't yet know his name. Something about him lingered, like a melody that wouldn't leave your head. She began noticing people she used to overlook, the janitor mopping the office floor, the old woman selling flowers outside the subway. Sometimes she'd stop to talk just to listen. And every time she did, she felt closer to something real, something missing in her own life. One rainy night, while waiting at a crosswalk, she saw another homeless man shivering under a bridge. She didn't have money, but she bought him a hot coffee with her credit card and handed it to him with a smile. Stay warm, she said. He looked at her in surprise, nodding silently. And once again she felt that quiet warmth in her chest. It was addictive, that feeling of doing good without expecting anything in return. Far away, J.P. Dumney watched from a car parked across the street. He had followed her quietly for days, not out of suspicion but out of curiosity. He wanted to see whether her kindness had been a moment or a mindset. He saw her helping, listening, smiling, even when life didn't smile back. And with every act, his decision became clearer. It was time to reveal himself. But not yet, not until he was sure she could handle what was coming. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Prepare the documents, he said. Her name is Kithryn Evans. Back in her apartment, Kithryn stood by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. She took out the old man's note again. Sometimes you meet angels in disguise, she whispered. Half to herself, maybe I did, as thunder rumbled outside. She made a silent promise. that no matter how hard life became, she would keep giving, keep believing. Because somewhere deep down, she knew the world still had good left in it. She just didn't know that good was already watching her, quietly, patiently, ready to change her life forever. The city's rhythm never slowed, even as days passed. Each sunrise for Catherine felt like a repeated scene, a weary blur of subway noise, endless emails, and silent prayers that her paycheck would stretch just a little further. The only difference now was the note. Every night, she'd pull out the small piece of paper the old man had left behind, the one with the words, "Sometimes you meet angels in disguise. Keep believing," and read it again before turning off her bedside lamp. It became her quiet ritual, her invisible comfort. She didn't know why, but something about that stranger's presence still echoed in her heart. Maybe it was his eyes, sad, searching, yet somehow gentle. Maybe it was the way he spoke, as if he saw straight through the noise of her world and recognized the goodness she had long forgotten existed in herself. Either way, he was gone now, vanished into the city like smoke, and though she didn't know it, someone else had started following her story. In a private office on the top floor of a glass tower, J.P. Dumney sat by the window, watching the rain trace silver lines down the pane. The city looked beautiful from above, calm, perfect, expensive. But he had learned long ago that beauty from a distance often hides the pain beneath. On the desk before him lay the same brown leather bag she had seen beside him that night. Inside were a few personal items, a photograph of his late wife and son, a fountain pen, and the now famous $10 bill, carefully framed under glass. It was a strange sort of shrine, not to wealth or power, but to remembrance. JP wasn't the man he once was. Years ago, he had been the face of success, a billionaire innovator who had created a tech empire from a garage, celebrated on magazine covers, envied by competitors. But then came the accident. His wife and son, gone in an instant. Money couldn't bring them back. So he'd walked away, from the company, the interviews, the world. He vanished, giving up everything but a hidden trust that quietly continued to multiply his wealth. In his self-imposed exile, he'd lived among the forgotten, homeless shelters, alleyways, park benches. He'd studied people. Some looked at him with disgust, others pity, but very few saw him as human. Until her, Catherine. A name that now lingered in his thoughts more than he liked to admit. He leaned back, replaying that moment in his mind, her eyes meeting his, the way her hand trembled as she gave her last money without asking a single question. He had been many things in his life, a CEO, a father, a man broken by grief, but never had he felt so humbled by a stranger's compassion. She didn't know who he was. She didn't want anything in return. She just gave, and that, JP realized, was what true wealth looked like. For Catherine, life grew harder. Her landlord taped another notice to her door. Final warning, payment due. She applied for extra shifts, but her boss only shrugged. Budgets are tight, he said. Try again next month. Her friends didn't understand. They lived in brighter apartments, with safer lives. When she mentioned her struggles, they offered polite sympathy and changed the subject. The only real conversation she'd had all week was with the barista at the coffee shop who smiled when she paid with coins. One night, walking home from work, she saw a group of homeless men gathered around a burning barrel for warmth. One of them, a thin, dark-skinned man with kind eyes, waved at her and said, "You the one gave old JP your last dollar?" She stopped. "JP? You mean the man who used to sit by the bookstore?" The man nodded. "Yeah, that's him. Kinda odd fellow. Comes and goes. Never begs, never drinks. Just sits and listens. Then one day, poof, gone." Catherine frowned. "Did he say where he was going?" The man chuckled softly. Said something about finding someone worth believing in. Thought he was talking nonsense. "Guess he found her," she smiled faintly, unsure what to say. As she walked away, the man's words played in her head. He found her. What did that even mean? The next morning, her phone buzzed with a new message. The sender's address was strange. admindumneyfoundation.org. At first, she thought it was spam. But then she read the subject line. "We've been observing your kindness. You've been shortlisted for a leadership fellowship." Her eyebrows knitted. She clicked open the email. It read, "Dear Ms. Evans, your recent community acts and ethical leadership have come to our attention. The Dumney Foundation recognizes individuals whose integrity shines even in hardship. You have been selected as a finalist for our Humanity Fellowship. Please report to the Dumney Group headquarters, 45th Avenue, Manhattan, this Friday at 10 a.m. for orientation. Regards, Eleanor Parks, executive assistant to Mr. J.P. Dumney. Kithryn blinked at the screen, half amused, half suspicious. "The what foundation?" she muttered. Dumney. The name felt familiar. She opened a browser and typed it in, instantly. The page filled with headlines. J.P. Dumney, the disappeared billionaire, the man who walked away from fortune. Mystery surrounds tech mogul's hidden foundation. Her mouth went dry. Could it be? No. There was no way the man on the sidewalk was that J.P. Dumney. The photos online showed a clean-cut, well-dressed man with sharp features and confident eyes. The one she met had been frail, quiet, almost ghost-like. Still, curiosity burned. She decided to go. Friday morning came cold and gray. Kithryn woke before dawn, her nerves tangled. She had no formal clothes, so she ironed her best blouse and borrowed a blazer from her neighbor. Her shoes were scuffed, but she polished them as best she could. When she arrived at 45th Avenue, she froze. The building was enormous, glass and steel gleaming under the sun, guarded by fountains that danced in perfect rhythm. The sign above the revolving doors read, "Dumney." She stepped inside, her heart racing. The lobby looked like something out of a dream. Marble floors, gold accents, and a chandelier that glittered like falling stars. Behind the reception desk, a woman smiled warmly. "Good morning," she said. "You must be Ms. Evans. How did you know?" Kithryn stammered. The woman smiled mysteriously. "Mr. Dumney has been expecting you." Kithryn followed the receptionist through a long corridor lined with photographs, images of children, hospitals, and schools around the world. Each one bore a small plaque that read, "Funded by the Dumney Foundation." They stopped before a pair of tall mahogany doors. The receptionist knocked once, then opened them. "Ms. Evans, sir." The office beyond was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the city. Behind a vast wooden desk stood a man in a dark suit, his back turned toward her. His silver hair gleamed under the light. When he turned around, her breath caught in her throat. It was him, the old man from the street, but clean, regal, alive in a way she'd never seen before. "You," she whispered, unable to move. "You're J.P. Dumney," he finished gently, smiling. "But you knew me by another name, the man sitting on the sidewalk." Kithryn stared in disbelief. Her mind spun. You're the billionaire everyone talks about?" He nodded, stepping closer. "Once, long ago. Now I'm just a man trying to understand the worth of humanity." Tears filled her eyes. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" "Because you would have treated me differently," he said softly. "And I needed to see if kindness still exists in this world. Without expectation, without reward." "You gave your last dollar without hesitation, not knowing you were giving it to me." Kithryn's lips trembled. "I didn't do it for recognition, I just couldn't walk past." "And that," JP said, "is exactly why you're here." He gestured for her to sit. On the desk before her lay an envelope with her name written in elegant cursive. Kithryn Evans. Inside, JP said, is an opportunity. "The Dumney Foundation has been seeking a director for our new community outreach program, someone who knows struggle, compassion, and resilience. You are that person." She stared at him, stunned. "I'm not qualified," JP interrupted gently. "You're human. That's qualification enough." He slid the envelope toward her. "Open it." Her hands shook as she pulled out the letter. It was an offer. Full-time employment, housing assistance, and a salary higher than she'd ever dreamed of. Her eyes welled with tears. "Why me?" JP smiled faintly. "Because sometimes the poorest heart holds the richest soul. And you reminded me what it means to be alive." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of fate hanging between them. Finally, Kithryn whispered, I thought you were just a man who needed help. JP chuckled softly. I was. You helped me far more than I helped you. He looked out the window, his eyes misty. I had lost faith in people. But that night when you knelt beside me, you brought me back. You reminded me that the world still has goodness. And for that, Miss Evans, I owe you everything. She didn't know what to say, so she simply smiled through her tears. Then maybe it wasn't an accident that we met, JP nodded. No, my dear. Nothing in life ever truly is. As Catherine left the building that day, clutching the envelope to her chest, the wind brushed her face, and the city looked different, brighter, softer, almost new. She stopped by the same spot near the bookstore where they had first met. The sidewalk was empty, but in her mind she could still see him. The quiet old man with tired eyes and a warm smile. She whispered into the air, "You were the angel in disguise, not me." But somewhere high above, in his office, JP Dumney stood by the window, smiling. "No," he murmured. "You're wrong. You were the miracle I was waiting for." The city seemed different the next morning. The rain had washed away the grime, but not the thoughts crowding Catherine's mind. She couldn't stop replaying last night. The warmth of the man's hand, the way his eyes shimmered with quiet dignity, and how he had whispered, "Thank you, my child," like it carried a lifetime of weight. She had gone home with nothing left in her wallet, but for some reason, her heart felt fuller than it ever had. That morning, as she stood in the mirror buttoning her faded office blouse, she caught sight of the blue shirt she'd worn yesterday, still damp from the drizzle. She smiled faintly. "Guess you're my lucky shirt now," she whispered to herself, not knowing just how true those words would turn out to be. Catherine worked at a small publishing firm downtown. Not glamorous, not rich, but honest work. She handled editing contracts, unpaid invoices, and occasionally wrote copy for book blurbs. Life was predictable, safe, and small, until today. She had just settled at her desk when her colleague Nora burst in, breathless, clutching her phone. "Catherine!" "Did you see the news?" Catherine blinked. "What news?" Nora turned her phone around, showing a headline that almost made Catherine drop her coffee. "Mystery millionaire found after disappearing for years, spotted helping locals in disguise." Below it was a photo, a grainy image of a man sitting on the sidewalk, a familiar black beanie on his head, and a soft, humble smile on his face. It was him. Catherine's heart started racing. That's the man from last night," Nora frowned. "What are you talking about? You saw this guy?" Catherine hesitated. Should she tell her? It sounded ridiculous, that a supposed homeless man she gave her last money to could actually be a millionaire. But there was no mistaking those eyes. I gave him some money yesterday," she murmured softly. Nora's jaw dropped. "Catherine!" "That means you met JP Dumney." Catherine blinked again. "Who? JP Dumney?" "The same JP Dumney who founded Dumney Group Holdings 15 years ago, one of the largest private real estate firms in the state. He vanished 5 years ago after his wife died in an accident. Everyone thought he went crazy or disappeared abroad, but look, he's been living like a homeless man all this time." The office buzzed with gossip as more colleagues crowded around, reading the article aloud. Catherine sat frozen, her heart pounding. Her mind replayed every second from last night. His calm tone, his kindness, and that haunting line he'd said before she left. "It's not what you give that matters, my child. It's what you give when you have nothing left." She remembered how his eyes had softened as if he saw through her. Not just the act of giving, but her quiet desperation behind it. And now she realized he wasn't a beggar. He was someone who had chosen to live among the forgotten. Someone who had lost everything money couldn't buy. That evening, Catherine couldn't concentrate on anything. She tried reading, writing, cleaning, but everything came back to that single encounter. She felt an inexplicable pull to see him again, to know more about the man who had turned her small act of kindness into something larger than life. So, she went back to the same street corner. The city lights shimmered off puddles. The smell of rain mixed with the scent of roasted peanuts from a nearby vendor. But the old man wasn't there. His blanket was gone, and the spot looked empty, colder somehow. Catherine stood there, feeling foolish and oddly disappointed. Maybe he had left after being recognized. Maybe she would never see him again. As she turned to leave, a voice spoke from behind her. "You came back." She spun around, and there he was. Clean-shaven, wearing a dark grey coat, his eyes clearer than before. "But there was no mistaking him, Mr. Dumney," she said softly. He smiled gently. "Please call me JP." For a moment, they just stood there, two worlds colliding again. One of simplicity, one of mystery. "You knew?" she asked. "You knew who I was and said nothing?" JP shook his head. "I didn't know your name, but I knew your heart." He paused, eyes distant. "People give easily when they can spare it. But you gave when you had nothing left. That kind of soul is rare, Catherine. How do you know my name?" she asked, startled. He smiled faintly. "I made a few calls today." Catherine's brows furrowed. "Wait, you looked me up?" "Let's say I wanted to understand why a girl would give her last few dollars to a stranger in the rain." She didn't know what to say. Because it was the right thing to do." JP's eyes softened. "That's what my late wife used to say." A silence hung between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. He took a step closer. "Would you have dinner with me, Catherine?" Just as two people who met by fate. Her instinct screamed to say no. He was a billionaire after all, and she was just a girl scraping through life. But something in his voice, in the sincerity of his gaze, made her nod. "Yes," she whispered. Dinner was at a quiet rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. Catherine felt completely out of place among the white tablecloths and crystal glasses. JP noticed her nervousness and smiled reassuringly. "I used to feel the same way. Before all of this," he said, gesturing to the city below. "Before money became a mask." She listened as he spoke, not like a man used to power, but like someone who had been humbled by loss. He told her how his wife, Amelia, had been the light of his world. After her sudden death, he lost all meaning in the empire they'd built together. "I left it all," he said quietly. "The suits, the boardrooms, the empty congratulations. I wanted to know what life felt like without people pretending to care." "And what did you find?" Catherine asked softly. He looked at her, eyes full of something raw. "I found humanity again. In people like you." Catherine's heart ached. There was a calm sadness in him, but also peace. The kind that comes when a man has walked through pain and found a way to live again. JP smiled gently. "You know, you reminded me of her, Amelia. She always believed kindness was the only wealth that never fades." Catherine felt her throat tighten. "She sounds wonderful." "She was," he whispered. "And for the first time in years, I felt like I saw a part of her again. Through you." As the night deepened, laughter slowly replaced awkwardness. JP shared stories from his life on the streets. Funny, heartbreaking, wise all at once. He spoke about a boy who offered him half a sandwich, an old lady who gave him her umbrella, and a stray dog that never left his side. "Money makes people powerful," he said, sipping his tea. "But losing it makes them human." Catherine listened intently, realizing this man had lived more truth in those years of hiding than most did in lifetimes of wealth. When dinner ended, JP stood and offered her his hand. "Thank you, Catherine. Not just for tonight, but for seeing me when no one else did." She blushed, unsure what to say. "It was just a small act." "No," he interrupted softly. "It was everything." He slipped something into her hand, a small folded note. "For you. Don't open it until you get home." That night, back in her small apartment, she sat on her bed and unfolded the note. Inside was a simple line written in elegant handwriting. "Meet me tomorrow at 10 a.m., Dumney Group headquarters." "Ask for me," her heart raced. Why was he calling her there? The next morning, Catherine walked into the towering glass building that bore his name. Employees greeted her respectfully, assuming she was someone important. She felt small and out of place. At the top floor, a secretary led her into JP's office. Minimalist, elegant, and breathtakingly high above the city, JP stood by the window, his reflection glowing in the morning light. "Good morning, Catherine," he said warmly. "I wanted you to see the world from a different height today." She smiled nervously. "It's beautiful." He turned to face her, eyes calm and steady. "Catherine, I've been searching for someone like you for a long time, someone with honesty, empathy, and courage. I want you to work with me, not as an assistant, but as a partner in rebuilding something meaningful." She froze. "Partner?" He nodded. "We're starting a new foundation, one that helps people like the ones you and I met on the streets. I want you to lead it." Tears welled in her eyes. "But why me?" JP smiled gently. "Because you gave your last dollar to a stranger and didn't expect anything back. That's the kind of heart that can change lives." Catherine stood there, trembling, realizing that one act of compassion had rewritten her destiny, and as she looked out over the vast city, she couldn't help but whisper to herself, "Sometimes, giving everything you have brings back more than you could ever dream of." The elevator ride up to the 45th floor of Dumney Group's headquarters felt unreal to Catherine. Just a week ago, she was counting coins at a bus stop, wondering how to stretch them until payday. Now, she was stepping into the office of one of the most powerful men in the country, not as a visitor, but as someone he called partner. The glass doors slid open, revealing a breathtaking view of the skyline, sunlight spilling across white marble floors, the hum of quiet efficiency, and a wall of awards marking decades of success. At the far end stood J.P. Dumney, hands in his pockets, gazing out the window as if measuring the weight of the world. He turned as she entered, a warm, knowing smile curving his lips. "You came," he said. "I almost didn't," she admitted honestly. "I kept thinking someone like me doesn't belong here." JP walked closer, his steps calm and deliberate. "And that's exactly why you do. People who believe they belong here usually forget what this place is supposed to mean." He gestured toward the massive cityscape beyond the glass. "All of this, these towers, these names, they're built on the dreams of people who just needed one chance. I want to give that chance back." Catherine tilted her head. "You mean the foundation?" JP nodded. "The Amelia Dumney Foundation, in her honor. It'll help rebuild lives, fund education, job training, and housing for the forgotten. I could fill it with executives and polished resumes. But what good is that if they've never stood in the rain with empty pockets?" Catherine smiled faintly. "And you want me to lead it?" "Yes," he said simply. "You know what it feels like to need help, and still choose to help someone else." Over the following weeks, Catherine threw herself into the work. She and JP met daily, brainstorming, planning, arguing passionately about how to make things real, not just symbolic. The foundation quickly became more than an idea. They visited shelters, spoke with struggling families, and designed programs where JP would often show up in disguise, sitting quietly among those he sought to help. Everywhere they went, people gravitated toward him, not because of his wealth, but because of his presence. And Catherine began to notice something else too. Behind his calm strength, there was still grief. The quiet ache of a man who had loved deeply and lost even deeper. Sometimes, when he spoke about his late wife Amelia, his voice would soften, almost fade. "She would have liked you," he once told Catherine during a late-night meeting at the office. "Why?" she asked gently. "Because you remind her of who she was. Someone who never walked past a hurting soul." Catherine smiled faintly. "I think she'd be proud of what you're building." JP looked at her for a long time, eyes shining with something unspoken. "I hope so," he said quietly. But as their vision began to take shape, not everyone celebrated it. In the glossy boardrooms of Dumney Group, whispers began to spread. Executives who had grown comfortable in JP's absence felt threatened by his sudden return, and even more by the mysterious young woman always at his side. "Who is she?" they asked behind closed doors. "Some charity girl? What's she doing in our meetings?" The CFO, a sharp-faced man named Richard Kane, watched them both closely. He had been JP's right-hand man once, before greed clouded his loyalty. When JP vanished years ago, Richard had quietly assumed control, diverting funds, manipulating contracts, and building a quiet empire within the empire. And now, the man he'd once served was back, with a stranger who saw too much. One afternoon, as Catherine reviewed documents in the conference room, Richard entered with his usual smirk. "You must be the famous Miss Catherine," he said, his tone polite but laced with arrogance. Catherine looked up from her papers. "And you must be Mr. Kane." "I've heard quite a bit about you," he continued. "A remarkable story, from waitress to partner." He chuckled lightly. "Impressive rise. You must have made quite the impression on Mr. Dumney." Catherine met his gaze steadily. It wasn't about impression. It was about intention. Richard tilted his head, pretending to be amused. "Of course. Intentions. We all have good ones, don't we?" JP entered just then, instantly changing the air in the room. Richard's smirk faded into a professional grin. "JP," he said smoothly, "we were just discussing the new foundation project. A noble cause. But quite expensive, don't you think?" JP leaned against the table, his tone calm but sharp. "What's expensive, Richard, is forgetting where we came from. Money will always come back. Trust doesn't." Richard's jaw tightened slightly. "Of course, sir. Just looking out for the company's interests." "Then look harder," JP said, his gaze unwavering. "We're building something that money can't buy." Later that evening, as they left the building, Catherine frowned. "He doesn't like me, does he?" JP sighed. "Richard doesn't like anyone who reminds him what honesty looks like." She smiled weakly. "He looked at me like I didn't belong here." JP glanced at her with a small smile. "That's what they said about me when I first started. Let them look. One day they'll have to look up." They shared a quiet laugh, but both sensed the tension growing in the shadows. Over the next month, the foundation gained massive public attention. Catherine's heartfelt interviews and JP's reappearance inspired headlines everywhere. "The billionaire who became a beggar to learn compassion." "Amelia Dumney Foundation, restoring dignity to the forgotten." Donations poured in. Volunteers lined up, and for the first time JP seemed genuinely at peace. One rainy evening, as they left a charity event, JP and Catherine stood under the same kind of drizzle that had brought them together. "You've done something I couldn't," JP said softly. "What's that?" she asked. "Made me believe again, in people, in second chances, in life." Catherine looked up at him, eyes glimmering with sincerity. "You gave me that same belief, JP." For a moment, they stood there, not billionaire and worker, not teacher and student, just two souls who had pulled each other out of the dark. But as the lightning cracked across the sky, a different storm was already brewing, one neither of them saw coming. The next morning, JP arrived at his office to find chaos. Employees whispered nervously. Security guards stood tense by the elevators. Richard Kane was waiting in his chair. "JP," he said coldly, "we have a problem." "What kind of problem?" Richard slid a folder across the table. "Audit results. Someone's been accessing restricted accounts. Funds missing. Records erased." JP frowned. "And you're telling me this now? I thought you should know before the media does." He paused. "The digital signature matches. Her login." JP's heart stopped. "Catherine?" Richard shrugged. "All evidence points that way. She's been handling foundation accounts. Maybe she saw an opportunity." JP's jaw clenched. "That's impossible." Richard leaned back, smirking slightly. "You trusted her quickly. Maybe too quickly." JP stood abruptly. "Get out." "Excuse me?" I said, "Get out." JP's voice thundered, calm composure replaced by a raw fury. "Before I forget who I used to be." Richard hesitated, then gathered his papers. "Just doing my job, sir. I hope you're right about her." As the door closed, JP sank into his chair, gripping the edge of the desk. His mind raced, doubt creeping in where trust once lived. He called Catherine immediately, but her phone went unanswered. Outside, the storm continued to rage, lightning, cutting through the sky as if foreshadowing the storm within his own heart. When Catherine finally arrived later that night, soaked from the rain, JP was waiting in his office, the folder open before him. She entered with a tired smile. "Sorry, I was at the shelter. The power went out there, so—" He cut her off quietly. "Did you take the money, Catherine?" The words froze her mid-step. "What?" "The foundation funds. Someone accessed the accounts using your ID." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "JP, I swear I would never—" "I want to believe you," he said, voice trembling slightly. "But I've seen betrayal wear friendly faces before." Catherine felt her throat tighten. "You think I'd steal from something we built together?" He looked away, pain in his eyes. "I don't know what to think right now." Tears welled in hers. After everything, after that night on the street, JP's silence cut deeper than any accusation could. She turned to leave, whispering, "You taught me that trust is more valuable than gold. I just wish you'd trusted me enough to remember that." The door clicked shut behind her, leaving JP alone with the storm, the folder, and the ghost of a doubt he would soon regret. The night Catherine left, the city felt heavier than usual, the kind of weight that settles not on your shoulders, but deep inside your chest. JP sat alone in his office, staring at the empty chair across from him, the one that had belonged to her for weeks. Her coffee mug still sat there, a small lipstick mark fading on its rim, and beside it, the notebook where she had scribbled her ideas about rebuilding lives. He reached out, brushing his fingers over her handwriting, each note a reflection of sincerity, compassion, and quiet brilliance. None of it looked like the work of a thief. And yet, the evidence sat on his desk. Digital logs, signatures, transactions. It didn't add up. He closed his eyes, trying to steady his thoughts. Had he misjudged her? The next morning, headlines exploded across media outlets. Funds missing from Amelia Dumney Foundation. JP's new partner under scrutiny. Mystery woman accused of embezzlement in Billionaire's charity. Everywhere he went, whispers followed. His staff avoided his gaze. And somewhere in the noise, JP realized the same people who once praised his compassion were now questioning his judgment. He tried calling Catherine again. No answer. Her apartment door remained locked, her phone disconnected, and her small rented room stood empty except for a note she'd left behind. "I didn't take anything. Please believe that." The paper trembled in his hand as he read it over and over, his throat tightening with guilt. Days turned into weeks. The foundation's work stalled, donations froze, and investors grew nervous. Richard Kane took control temporarily, promising to stabilize the company while JP took time to recover. But JP didn't retreat. Instead, he started investigating quietly, using his old contacts, his instinct, and the kind of patience that only comes from pain. He requested access to the raw system logs himself, something Richard hadn't expected. Late nights turned into early mornings as JP sat in the dim glow of his computer, analyzing every trace of digital movement. And then, there it was. A small inconsistency, the so-called login from Catherine's ID had come from an internal server that was restricted to executive-level clearance only, meaning it couldn't have been her. Someone had cloned her credentials. Someone inside, JP's hands clenched into fists. Richard, he knew it the moment he said the name aloud. The next day, JP walked into the boardroom unannounced during a meeting. Conversations died instantly. Richard looked up from his chair, his smile practiced and calm. JP, he said lightly, I wasn't expecting you. You should be resting. Cut the performance, JP interrupted. His voice was low, but it carried the weight of thunder. You planted the evidence against Catherine. Richard raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? JP tossed a folder on the table. Inside were printouts of the system logs, timestamps, and a trace of the duplicate access keys that matched Richard's authorization ID. I built this company, Richard. JP said coldly. Did you really think you could hide from me in my own network? For a brief second, Richard's mask slipped, the faint flicker of panic. But he recovered quickly, leaning back with a smirk. Even if that were true, who do you think they'll believe? The man who vanished for years pretending to be homeless, or the one who kept this empire alive? JP leaned closer, his eyes steel. They'll believe the man who has nothing left to lose. He pulled out his phone and hit play on an audio recording. We just need to make her look guilty, Richard's voice said from the speaker. Once she's out, we can reroute the foundation funds and keep the board quiet. Dumney will never see it coming. The room went silent. The board members stared in shock. Richard's face went pale. JP's voice dropped, calm but deadly. You're finished. Security entered moments later, escorting Richard out as cameras flashed. For the first time in weeks, JP felt the air return to his lungs, but it was mixed with shame. Because while justice had been served, something much more fragile had been broken in the process. Catherine's trust. That night, he returned to the same street where it had all begun, the rain-soaked corner where she had first handed him her last bit of money. He stood there under the dim glow of the lamppost, watching the puddles ripple beneath his shoes. How did I forget? He whispered. You gave when you had nothing left. The realization hit him like lightning. He had become the same kind of man he once despised, quick to doubt, blind to faith. He closed his eyes and made a decision. He was going to find her, no matter how far she had gone. 3 days later, his search led him to a small coastal town 2 hours away. It was quiet, the kind of place where waves whispered more than people did. Through a contact at a local shelter, he learned a young woman had been volunteering there for weeks, helping clean, teaching kids, fixing whatever was broken. When he walked into the shelter, the sight of her stopped him cold. Catherine stood near a group of children, her hair tied back, sleeves rolled, laughing softly as she handed out food. The kids adored her. She looked tired, older somehow, but there was light in her eyes. She froze when she saw him. The laughter died, replaced by guarded silence. JP, she said quietly. What are you doing here? He took a breath. Looking for you. You shouldn't have bothered, she said, her tone flat but her voice trembling. You already decided what I was. I was wrong, he said simply, and I came to tell you that. She turned away, focusing on the children. It doesn't matter anymore. You believed the world before you believed me. That's not something an apology can fix. JP stepped closer, his voice low but steady. Maybe not, but I still need you to know the truth. He told her everything. Richard's betrayal, the falsified records, the recordings, the confession. He didn't leave out his own failure either. I let fear speak louder than faith. And for that, I'll never forgive myself. Catherine said nothing for a long moment. The waves crashed softly outside and the sound filled the silence between them. Finally, she whispered, you once said money will always come back. But trust doesn't. You were right. JP's throat tightened. Then let me earn it back. Not as a billionaire. Not as a man who failed you. Just as someone who remembers what it's like to be human. She looked at him. Truly looked. His eyes held no pride, no defense, only remorse and a quiet plea. Why me, JP? She asked softly. You could have anyone run that foundation. He smiled faintly. Because no one else would do it with their heart. Over the next few days, JP stayed in town, helping at the shelter alongside her. He didn't talk much, didn't push. He just worked, fixing broken tables, serving meals, quietly standing beside her, and slowly, the ice between them began to melt. One evening, as the sun dipped into the ocean, Catherine found him sitting on the beach, his shoes off, waves brushing against his feet. You really don't give up, do you? She said softly. He looked up, smiling gently. You didn't give up on a stranger once. Why should I give up on the only person who reminded me what hope feels like? She sat beside him, the wind tugging at her hair. I don't know if I can go back, she admitted. After everything that happened, JP nodded. Then don't go back. Move forward, now with me. Let's start again together. Build something that can't be corrupted this time. She looked out at the sea, the horizon glowing gold. You really think we can? He turned to her, eyes shining with quiet certainty. I don't just think it, Catherine. I need to believe it. When they returned to the city weeks later, the foundation reopened. Stronger, cleaner, reborn. Catherine's name was cleared publicly, and in a surprising act of humility, JP announced her as the new executive director of the Amelia Dumney Foundation. Standing before the press, she spoke with calm conviction. We live in a world where trust is treated like currency. But I've learned that the richest people are the ones who keep giving, even when the world takes from them. Her words spread everywhere. The story of the girl who gave her last money to a man she thought was a beggar and changed both their lives became a symbol of redemption and hope. That night, as they stood once again under the same lamppost where it all began, JP handed her a single folded note, the same way he once had months ago. She opened it and read aloud. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness becomes the biggest turning point of your life. She looked up at him, eyes glistening. Did you write this just now? He smiled softly. No, you did. The day you handed me your last dollar. Catherine laughed through her tears. Then I guess I've been investing in people all along. JP chuckled, his eyes filled with warmth. And that's the only investment that never fails. The rain began to fall again, gentle, cleansing, full of memory. And as it did, they stood there quietly, no longer two strangers bound by circumstance, but two souls bound by grace. The next morning, Catherine woke to the faint sound of birds outside her window. The sunlight streamed through soft curtains, touching her face with golden warmth. She blinked slowly, taking in the unfamiliar ceiling, the soft sheets, the smell of lavender in the air. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it hit her, JP Dumney's villa. Her eyes darted to the bedside table, where a silver tray held breakfast, and a folded note rested beside a single white rose. Trembling slightly, she picked it up. The handwriting was elegant, firm, and unmistakably his. Good morning, Catherine. There's a garden behind the glass doors. Meet me there when you're ready, JP. She smiled faintly, pressing the note to her chest before setting it back down. When she stepped into the garden, her blue dress caught the morning breeze. The flowers glowed with color, lavender, roses, tulips, all meticulously arranged. JP sat near a fountain, wearing a cream-colored shirt and holding a mug of coffee. His face, calm yet tired, softened the instant he saw her. You slept well? He asked. She nodded. Better than I have in months. He gestured for her to sit. Good. There's a lot we need to talk about. Catherine sat quietly. She had questions, hundreds of them, but she let him start. I used to come here every summer, he began, his gaze fixed on the water. Before the money. Before the fame. My mother planted those roses over there. She said, if you ever forget who you are, come sit among your roots. I never did, until you reminded me. Catherine's brows furrowed slightly. Reminded you of what? That wealth means nothing if it isn't shared. He turned to her then, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen. You gave me your last dollar, Catherine. Not knowing who I was, not expecting anything in return. I don't remember the last time someone did something selfless for me. Her throat tightened. It wasn't much. It was everything. They sat in silence for a while, the sound of the fountain echoing gently. Then JP leaned forward. I want to offer you something, but not what you think. Catherine looked at him, unsure what he meant. I don't want to give you money, Catherine. You've earned much more than that. I want to partner with you. Partner? He smiled. Yes. You once said you dreamed of helping people, feeding families, giving them hope. I want to make that dream real. Together, we'll build a foundation. Your name first. You'll run it. I'll fund it. But it'll be your vision. Catherine blinked, tears welling. JP, I can't. You can, he interrupted gently. You already changed one man's life. Imagine what we could do for thousands. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, ideas, and hope. JP and Catherine traveled across the city, meeting social workers, community leaders, and families living on the edge of poverty. Wherever they went, people were drawn to her kindness, her sincerity. Within months, the Hopeline Foundation was born. Its mission was simple: to restore dignity to those forgotten. The first building opened in the same part of the city where Catherine had once lived. The same street where she'd met JP. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. During the opening ceremony, reporters swarmed, cameras flashed, but JP stayed in the background. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about her. Catherine, standing before the crowd, spoke softly into the microphone. Months ago, I gave my last few dollars to a man I thought was homeless. I didn't know that act would change my life, but it wasn't about who he was. It was about who I became through kindness. Sometimes when you give without expecting anything, life gives back in ways you can't imagine. The crowd applauded. JP's eyes glistened as he watched her speak, her voice trembling with sincerity. After the event, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Catherine walked to where JP stood near the steps. You stayed in the shadows again, she teased. He chuckled. You shine better in the light. They stood quietly, watching families enter the new center, children laughing, mothers crying with relief, volunteers distributing meals. This is all you, she said softly. He shook his head. No, this is us. Years passed. The Hopeline Foundation grew beyond anything they imagined. Shelters, schools, hospitals. JP's name appeared rarely in interviews, but his influence was everywhere. Catherine became known as the woman who gave everything. But to her, none of it compared to the quiet evenings when she and JP would sit in the garden, drinking tea, sharing stories. One evening, as autumn leaves painted the air gold, JP handed her a small velvet box. She hesitated. What's this? Something I should have given you long ago, he said. Inside was a simple gold locket. No diamonds, no shine, just a photo of the day they opened their first center, smiling side by side. On the back, engraved in tiny letters, were the words, "To the girl who gave when she had nothing." Catherine covered her mouth, tears streaming. JP, he smiled faintly. You reminded me what life is for. If I gave you the world, it still wouldn't equal what you gave me that day. She threw her arms around him. And for the first time, he held her like a man who finally understood love. Not the romantic kind, but the kind born from shared purpose and grace. When JP passed away a few years later, quietly in his sleep, the world mourned a billionaire philanthropist. But Catherine mourned her friend, her mentor, the man who had once sat on a cold sidewalk, testing humanity one coin at a time. At his funeral, the letter he left for her was read aloud. Catherine, if you're reading this, it means my time has come. Don't mourn me. Continue what we started. Keep giving, not money, but heart. I left something for you in the garden. That evening, she returned to the villa's garden. Beneath the old oak tree where they used to talk, a small plaque was set into the ground. She brushed the dirt away, tears blurring her vision. To the woman who taught me how to be rich again. Catherine knelt there for a long time, the wind rustling through the leaves, the fountain whispering softly nearby. She smiled through her tears and whispered, Goodbye, JP. Then, standing tall, she turned toward the sunrise, because some stories don't end. They bloom, quietly, in every act of kindness that follows. Moral. Sometimes the richest hearts wear the poorest clothes, and sometimes one act of kindness can rewrite the destiny of two souls forever.